In 100 BC, Rome was the largest city in the Mediterranean world, far surpassing its most formidable competitors, such as Alexandria in Egypt. When Augustus was born in 63 BC, the population of Rome was at least 750,000. By the end of the 1st century BC, it may have reached 1 million. We cannot provide more precise numbers, but these estimates at least give an idea of the vastness of ancient Rome. Despite the large population, transportation in this era was underdeveloped, relying mainly on walking or horseback riding. Thus, the geographical scope of the city of Rome was much smaller than it would later become. Housing, especially in the poorer districts, was extremely crowded. Most city dwellers lived in dirty, crowded apartment buildings, which were prone to fires and infectious diseases. A small number of elite members lived in single-family houses. The apartment buildings could be 6 or 7 stories high, with the highest floors lacking running water and sanitation facilities, making them the least comfortable and the cheapest to rent. In the event of a fire, residents on the upper floors would naturally have the hardest time escaping. To reduce the threat of fires and apartment building collapses, Rome's first emperor, Augustus, legally limited the height of apartment buildings to 70 Roman feet, approximately 20.7 meters. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, Emperor Nero further reduced the height limit to 60 Roman feet, approximately 17.75 meters. Emperor Trajan later limited the height to 16 meters. Despite these regulations, apartment buildings of 8 or 9 stories were still common. It is estimated that an apartment building with a living area of 330 square meters could house more than 40 people. This gives an idea of the population density in ancient Rome. In the densely populated, crowded environment of the ancient city, lacking modern firefighting methods, fires were commonplace. The most famous fire in ancient Rome occurred on the night of July 18th to 19, 64 AD, causing massive destruction to the city and taking 6 days to control. Of Rome's 14 districts, 3 were completely destroyed by the fire, and only 4 remained unscathed. Given the frequent outbreaks of fire brigades naturally emerged. The earliest known Roman fire brigade was privately owned and composed of slaves. Those familiar with Roman history should know Crassus. He, along with Caesar and Pompey, formed the first triumvirate, dominating the Roman Republic. He also suppressed the Spartacus slave uprising. Crassus was one of the Republic's wealthiest individuals, famously stating that a person who cannot raise their own army cannot be considered rich. Despite his immense wealth and living in an era of luxury and indulgence, Crassus himself led a very frugal lifestyle. He did not waste money on pleasures, but instead put great effort into earning more money. He was interested in a wide range of businesses, with real estate being the most important. He owned a fire brigade with 500 men, all of whom were slaves. This was unique in Rome at that time. Much of the city consisted of densely packed slums with narrow streets, flanked by crowded, often poorly constructed high-rise buildings. Landlords rented out these buildings, extracting as much profit as possible. Fires could easily break out in such areas, spreading quickly, especially during the hot Italian summers. Crassus would wait for fires to break out and then purchase properties in the path of the fire at extremely low prices. Once the deal was finalized, he would send his fire brigade to extinguish the fire, usually by demolishing buildings to create fire breaks. Some of the properties he bought could be saved, and his slave craftsmen would rebuild on the sites of demolished buildings. Alternatively, he would negotiate with the owners of houses threatened by or already on fire to agree on a price for his firefighting services. Desperate homeowners often had no choice but to yield to his extortion. Ultimately, a significant portion of the city of Rome came under his ownership. By the late 1st century BC, under Augustus's reign, an ambitious politician named Marcus Ignatius Rufus also formed a fire brigade with his slaves. Unlike Crassus, he did not do this purely for commercial profit and to exploit fires. Instead, he offered free assistance to the public, protecting their homes and even using his own money to aid disaster victims. He did this to win the people's favor and accumulate political capital. Later, he used force to threaten others during elections and was rumored to have plotted against Augustus. In 19 BC, he was arrested and executed. After Augustus took control of Rome, the state entered a relatively stable and peaceful period. Such an important task as firefighting could no longer be left to greedy or ambitious individuals. In 6 AD, Augustus established the Vigiles, a fire brigade divided into 7 cohorts, each with around 500 men, responsible for 2 districts of the city. In addition to firefighting, the Vigiles also carried out night patrols, apprehended thieves, and were sometimes employed to maintain order. The vast majority of the Vigiles were freedmen, former slaves who had gained their freedom but did not necessarily enjoy full citizenship rights. At that time, a large portion of Rome's population consisted of freedmen. To fund the Vigiles, the authorities imposed a 2% tax on the sale of slaves. Initially, it was difficult to recruit members for the Vigiles. To address this issue, in 24 AD, the government announced that anyone who joined the Vigiles would receive full citizenship, and after serving for 6 years, would be granted a bonus upon retirement. The members of the Vigiles lived in barracks and were subject to military-style discipline. They were equipped with water pumps, buckets, hooks to pull down burning materials, shovels, spades, axes, and even siege engines such as catapults used to demolish burning buildings and create fire breaks. Each cohort's equipment was standardized, and the fire engines were horse-drawn, carrying large water pumps. The Vigiles needed to be very familiar with their districts, including the locations of water sources. They would also form a long line to pass buckets of water. They used water-soaked blankets to cover flames. They even knew chemical methods for extinguishing fires, such as throwing a substance containing vinegar into the fire. In many cases, the best way to fight a fire was to demolish buildings to create fire breaks. When fires broke out in high-rise buildings, they would lay out pads and mattresses on the ground to help residents escape by jumping. Firefighting was one aspect, but preventing fires was equally important. One of the main responsibilities of the Vigile was to ensure daily fire prevention measures. Every household was required to have firefighting equipment on hand. The 6th century Justinian Code stipulated that the Vigiles should remind everyone to always have water ready in rooms above the 2nd floor. If residents neglected these reminders and caused a fire, they could face corporal punishment. During the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, Emperor Nero took part in directing the Vigiles. There were rumors that the Vigiles deliberately allowed the city to burn under Nero's orders to clear land for the emperor's new palace. However, after the fire, Nero enacted new fire safety laws to ensure that the public had easier access to water.